Hello, everyone. I'm Christy Risk, Senior Editor at GenomeWeb, and I'll be your moderator for today. Welcome to the first webinar in our Next Generation Proteomics for Precision Oncology series. The title of today's webinar is Oncology in the Time of COVID-19, Quantitative Proteomic Analysis of Anti-IL-6 Treated Patients, and our sponsor is Bionosis. Our panelists for today are Dr. Jean-Marie Michaud, a medical oncologist at the Gustave Roussy Institute, and Dr. Vito Dozio, a scientific project manager at Bionosis. You can type in a question at any time during the webinar. You can do this through the Q&A panel, which appears on the right side of the webinar screen. And if you look to the tray at the bottom of your window, you'll see a series of widgets to enhance your webinar experience. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Michaud. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and hello. Thank you so much, and hello. I hope that the sound is good, and thank you for this invitation to present and to discuss the complexity of COVID-19 and cancer in this webinar. So, my name is Dr. Michaud. I'm an oncologist at Gustave Roussy, and we will discuss in this presentation at the time of oncology how we manage COVID-19 patients and how we can study in-depth analysis of some treatment for COVID-19, such as interleukin-6 treatment. So we will see some background and introduction in this first part of the study. Then we will discuss the result of a study of circulating proteins associated to anti-IL-6 resistance, therapeutic resistance. And in the second part, we will discuss the result of one study performed at Gustave Roussy in cancer patients and the frailty of patients with hematological disease in our center with severe COVID-19 presentation. So we will conclude, based on these two studies, the lessons and what we learned during the crisis of COVID-19 this year. So just to begin, for the introduction, this is a slide just to say that the COVID-19 pandemic is still present, and as you know, in Europe and also in India, there is difficulties today with increase of the pandemic, and we hope that it could be controlled by vaccination. But just to say that up to date, the control of the pandemic is not achieved. What we discuss in this context of COVID-19 is high inflammation. And as you know, this is a viral infection. And firstly, we discuss and we propose some antiviral treatment. It was 1 year ago, and we hope that we could obtain some control of the disease with control of the virus. But the reality was quite different, and there was no significant antiviral treatment. And we will see in our patients an hyper-inflammatory response induced by the SARS-CoV-2 infection. And this inflammation was the major cause of disease severity and death. So based on this data, we performed some analysis on macrophage and on immune cells and innate immune cells that sense and respond to the virus in the body. And this macrophage produce hyper-inflammatory response. And so the idea was to control the hyper-inflammatory response by anti-inflammatory drugs. So it was not evident at the beginning of the pandemic, but we will introduce some treatment to control the hyper-inflammatory response. So in this slide, we can see that there is 3 points in COVID-19. The first is immunity, the second is inflammation, and the third is intervention. And so we will see that one of the most important cytokines was IL-6. So it's interleukin-6 is a pro-inflammatory cytokines that was found very increased in the lung of patients with COVID-19. Of course, there was also some other cytokines such as IP10, MIP1 alpha, or MCP, but IL-6 was very involved in the disease pathology. So we have the idea to propose anti-IL-6 treatment to control the cytokine storm in the lung of the patients, to improve the condition of the patients, and hopefully to limit the severity of the disease and the need for mechanical ventilation, the need for oxygen support. So this was not so evident, because when you put anti-inflammatory drug, you can also have some discussion about the control of the immunity, but the level of IL-6 in COVID-19 was very pathologic, and this was a negative cytokine in the control of the disease. So this was also some discussion about the immunity. And as you can see in this slide, there is two parts of immunity. The third in red is there is a defective immune response in patients with COVID-19, and there is an accumulation of immune cell defective in the lung, causing overproduction of these pro-inflammatory cytokines and resulting in cytokine storm. Alternatively, in the right part of the slide, we can see healthy immune response. And this is the initial inflammations that could attack the T cell response and eliminate the infected cells and produce the clearance of the virus. So what we see is a bad response in the left part of the slide. And this bad response, as you can see, is mediated by many points, and these points are probably some cytokines. So the idea was to propose anti-IL-6 treatment to control the bad immunity of the patients. An important, very important point was this study that was performed at Paris, and we have participated in this study, and this is one of explanation of some patients develop some very severe COVID-19 and other patients have no symptoms. What was the difference? We proposed in this study to perform a genetic analysis of people, and we can patients some mutation, for example, in TLR3, and this mutation is in the interferon pathway. Also, it was seen in this study the very low level of interferon gamma in the serum of patients with very severe COVID-19. So it was concluded that patients with very severe COVID-19 had a defect of the TLR3 pathway and interferon pathway. And so this is very important. We have also some similar results with influenza virus, but it was very clear that interferon pathway was pathologic and altered in patients with COVID-19. So based on this data, there was some many proposals for the treatment of COVID-19. So first was the most evident was to propose some antiviral drug, but it do not work. So treatment was very with very poor efficacy, and it was not continuously given to the patients today. So there is no antiviral drug approved today. And it was also proposed some other treatment to control the COVID-19. So it was proposed some convalescent plasma and we will discuss this point in our study. And finally, immunomodulatory drug was an anti-inflammatory drug, and anti-cytokine drug was only treatment that could improve the outcome of the patients, as we can see in this slide. This is a recovery study of patients hospitalized in England. And as you can see, there is a difference. There is a clear difference in patients treated with dexamethasone. There is a decrease of the need for mechanical ventilation for 20%. So this was the first study to demonstrate improvement of the outcome of patients with anti-inflammatory drugs. So very important to the study. And standard of care now based on dexamethasone for severe patients with requirement of oxygen therapy, as you know. But this was not the only study. There was also some studies that propose other treatment, and another treatment was to target the interleukin 6 with some some drugs such as tocilizumab, that is a target treatment for anti-IL-6 receptor. So you can see in this study, this was an international study, and patients were treated with tocilizumab, and there was a decrease of 20% of the risk of mechanical ventilation. And this was another study that we proposed in France in a multi-cohort academic study, and the result was confirmed in this study that patients treated with tocilizumab, as you can see in the left panel, with tocilizumab had a reduced risk of mechanical ventilation. In the right panel, you can see that the overall survival is similar, but the follow-up is not very important, only 28 days, and we can see in the future if there is some difference in the overall survival. But the design of the study was designed for the endpoint of mechanical ventilation at 14 days, and the endpoint was achieved. So we conclude that tocilizumab could reduce the risk of mechanical ventilation in patients with severe COVID-19 hospitalized in France. So there are some therapeutic approach that confirm the result of tocilizumab in TERREST. This is not exactly the same study. The magnitude of therapeutic effect is different in the study, but all the study demonstrate an improvement of the patients treated. Not all the study completed the endpoint, but some study completed the endpoint, and there is a meta-analysis that will be published in a few days that confirm the role of anti-interleukin 6 treatment to improve the outcome of patients with COVID-19. So based on this data, we were lucky at Gustave Roussy to treat patients and to see some improvement of patients treated with tocilizumab. And we discussed with our partner to better understand what could be the best patients to treat with anti-IL-6, or what is the possibility of resistance to the treatment, because not all the patients improved. Some patients had a response to the treatment, but not all the patients. And so this is not a miraculous treatment, and there is still a lot of things that we have to understand with this treatment. And we discussed with Biognosys to perform some investigation to personalize the treatment and to find the right indication, and to see which patients could benefit from the anti-IL-6 treatment and which patients did not benefit from the treatment. So we will contact Biognosys, and we complete a circulating protein study associated with the response of the treatment. And the objective of the study was firstly to understand how the treatment could work. What is the biomarkers associated with response and no response to the treatment, and to understand also which could be the best population to treat with this treatment. So it was a really interesting study, and we contact Biognosys and Vito Dosio to perform to help us for the management of this study. So it was really interesting to work with Biognosys for this study, and I will present with Vito the result of this interesting circulating study. Vito, if you want to...
Thanks, Jean-Marie. Yeah. Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Vito. I'm project manager here at Biognosys. So I would like now to start and spend a few minutes presenting our company and the technology we are using, and the technology we use also in this study in collaboration with Jean-Marie and IGR. So Biognosys was founded in 2008, so 13 years ago, as a spin-off from the lab of proteomics pioneer Rudi Abersold at ETH Zurich. And today we are an established leader in next generation proteomics. So our technology is based on mass spectrometry, and this allows us to comprehensively and accurately measure protein and peptide in different types of samples, as we will see later. So one of the reasons of Biognosys' success is definitely its strong scientific foundation, as we consider that we have more than half of all the employees with a PhD, and also a very strong R&D department that constantly invent and develop workflow and solution. So this in terms of sample preparation, in LC-MS workflow, and data analysis software, as we also develop our own software that we use internally, but we also sell outside. So all this workflow are obviously patented. So we have now currently 21 international patents. We also strongly collaborate externally with academic institutions such as ETH Zurich, for instance, with which we publish in a high-impact peer-reviewed journal. And overall, we have more than 1,400 publications that were featuring Biognosys workflow and products. While Biognosys is not only R&D, we also have a contract research. We are also a contract research organization, and we offer contract research services for a broad range of application and therapeutic areas. All this obviously needs a bit of space, and so that's why we recently moved to our brand new laboratory with more than 900 square meters, which correspond to almost 10,000 square feet. So as I said, we are also a contract research organization. We are providing our services to major pharmaceutical industry, hospital, academic institution. Some of them are listed here. And to date, we have been working with more than 800 unique clients. So I want to give you just a quick overview about the workflow that we generally use. So we have different workflows for different applications. In this case, we use this discovery proteomics workflow. So this was used in the project together with IGR. So all start with a sample, obviously. We can process all type of samples, basically, plasma, serum, CSF, urine, tissue, fresh tissue, FFP tissue, or cells. These 4 different organisms as well. So we obviously work mostly with human, mouse, rat, but we also work with much less common species, so the only thing we need is an annotated genome. So in the first step, we lyse the samples, we extract the proteins, and then we need to reduce and alkylate them. And then finally, we digest the proteins into peptides. So this is important to understand because so our workflow is based on identifying and quantifying peptide. And then afterwards, during the data analysis, from the peptide information, we can retrieve protein information. So this is the so-called bottom-up approach. So we, our analyte is the peptide, and we separate the peptide by liquid chromatography coupled to mass spectrometry. So we first separate by LC and then analyze the peptides by mass spectrometry. And then once we generate the data from the mass spec, we can analyze using software. So in this case, we have Spectronaut, which is our in-house developed software for this kind of discovery proteomics workflow. So it's important to notice that this workflow is label-free. That means that proteins quantity are determined relatively across the samples, and we don't need any chemical labeling of protein. So more in detail about the present study. So as Jean-Marie will go more into detail in the next slides, but we processed 57 serum samples from COVID-19 infected patients at different time points. So we use only 5 microliter of serum. So this is what we only need for the whole workflow, 5 microliters. And we process those samples to peptide. As I just said, we denaturate the proteins, reduce alkylation, and then trypsin digestion. So once we retrieve the peptides, we then analyze them by liquid chromatography coupled to mass spectrometry. With Spectronaut, we can then retrieve the protein quantities. And then, as we will see, we use different strategies to infer biologically and clinically relevant information from that. So as just an overview, we could quantify 510 proteins corresponding to 7,000 peptides. And so we have a peptide to protein ratio of 14. That means that for each protein, we have, on average, 14 peptides. So those 510 proteins were quantified across all 57 samples consistently. That means that we have always a value. We don't have any missing value. And also, so we could measure them consistently. This is shown, for instance, in this first plot on the left here, where we have the number of proteins in each sample. And as you can see, we have almost a straight line, in the meaning that the number of proteins quantified in each sample is consistent, very similar to each other. So the consistency of the approach is also confirmed by the technical coefficient of variation, which is very low. So only 7.6% for technical injection. Finally, once we collected the protein quantity for all the samples, we then use a statistical approach to select panel of proteins based on statistical iteration. So we usually perform statistical analysis by putting threshold for a fold change of 1.5 and a Q-value of 0.05. Jean-Marie will go more into detail about that, but in this presentation, we will focus mostly on time point 1. That means on after treatment, so on the serum of patient after treatment. And then we focus on 3 different comparisons, which are responder versus non-responder to the therapy, survivor versus non-survivor, and cancer versus non-cancer. So then once we select this panel of proteins, we then combine and use network gene ontology and hierarchical clustering to extrapolate biological biologically relevant information. So to this end, I would now hand it over back to Jean-Marie, who will present the results more in detail. Jean-Marie.
Yes, thank you, Vito, for the introduction of the study, and we will see in more details now what is the more results of the study. So we will see that the summary of the results is as follows. So we have some patients in the clinic that were hospitalized for COVID-19, and they were all treated with anti-IL-6 treatment, and the name of the treatment is tocilizumab, given intravenously. And some patients had a favorable outcome. It was 16 patients, and unfavorable outcome 9 patients. So we compare the proteomic profile of these patients, and as you just say, Vito, we analyze not only the response to the treatment, but also different parameters such as mortality and the presence of cancer or not, because our center is a specialist in cancer treatment. We have seen that there was 4 different protein-protein interaction, and the first one was a complement classical pathway, and patients with some MBL2 and substrate of complement pathway C4 and C9 increase had an unfavorable outcome of the COVID-19. So the second finding was a platelet degranulation was very important for the outcome of the patient. And if the patient had an increase of thrombospondin and PF4 proteins, these patients are expected to have a good outcome of the disease. The third one was the acute protein phase inflammation, and patients with elevated calprotectin and calreticulin have unfavorable outcome. And finally, the last point was IgE receptor signaling pathways with increase of TEC proteins had a favorable outcome. So this is an example of the treatment that we can produce with the result of the study. So in the left part, this is the top 24 significantly changing proteins ranked by Q value and between responder to the treatment tocilizumab and non-responder to the treatment tocilizumab. And data is presented as mean and error with a standard error of the mean. And in the right part, there is all the significantly change between the response and the gene set enrichment set analysis. And there is a protein-protein interaction that could display a network. So we can see first that the first point is these 2 proteins, and these 2 proteins is acute proteins of fibrinogen, and this was inflammatory proteins, very important in the context of response or no response to the treatment. It was not also fibrinogen, but we know that the fibrinogen is important. But the second very important and most associated with the response to the treatment was these 4 proteins with protein-protein interaction of complement classical pathway. There was some MBL2 and complement 4 and complement 9, and these proteins are implicated in the non-response to the treatment. And the third point in this network was this type of network and proteins, and you can see the color is blue, and these proteins are implicated with the favorable outcome of the patients under treatment, and these proteins belong to the platelet degranulation. And if the platelet degranulation is maintained in the patients, this is a good signal. For example, with thrombospondin 1 or with PF4 or other platelet components. The second proteomic profile is this one, and this was analyzed for the mortality of the patients. This is a little bit more complicated in the network, but this is the same presentations with the top 24 significantly changed in the left part of the slide, and this is the network of the protein. So we can see that the most important proteins, and as it is a little bit complicated, this is still the same acute protein inflammation that is seen here, very implicated in the mortality of the patients. But we also discover that there is an important network that is associated with poor outcome, and this is calreticulin and calprotectin proteins. And as you know, probably, if you are interested in the COVID-19, this calprotectin and calreticulin are very important protein in the outcome of the patients. So it was confirmed in our study as a major and probably crucial component of mortality of the patient. So calreticulin network is very important in the outcome of the patients. And thirdly, you can see in these three proteins favorable outcome of the patients, and this is quite the same with the previous slide, PF4 and thrombospondin conservation, and is associated in blue with favorable outcome of the patients. So this is quite the same presentations with cancer versus non-cancer. We do not enter in details, but we can see, interestingly, some results in the top 24 proteins dysregulated. And you can see, for example, there is some CRP. So CRP is very similar to IL-6. This is a surrogate marker of the treatment. And very interestingly, you can see a very similar profile of the treatment. And this is probably like a pharmacodynamic effect of the treatment. And the CRP decrease in all the patients treated. That is fine about the pharmacodynamics of the treatment, but this could not reflect only the response to the treatment. And finally, we perform with Vito this heat map based on the top 24 significantly changing proteins from both responder and non-responder, and survivor and non-survivor, and cancer and non-cancer after treatment. And this was combined and displayed using a heat map with aggregation of the data. And you can see that in the first part of the study, we can just distinguish. There is two parts in the heat map. The top part is as follow, and all the proteins implicated in this part is inflammatory proteins, as we can see. And very interestingly, you can see that in the bottom part of the slide, there is another group of proteins, and all the proteins belonging to this part belong to the immune proteins. It was some immunoglobulins proteins. So this highlights that the role of immunity is very important. And we have here some discovery panel of the important protein of immunity implicated with the outcome of the patients. So we move to the second part of the study, and we discuss with our colleague in oncology and hematology, and some patients presenting with viremia. So it was the positivity of the COVID-19 virus in the blood of the patients. And so we see that the outcome of the patients with cancer and solid tumor and hematological cancer were different. So we investigate these patients. So this part two of the presentation is more clinical, and this is new information that we have submitted to the Annals of Oncology journal. So the severity of COVID-19 is different between patients with solid tumor and hematological malignancy. As you can see in the right panel, the mortality is the same. The overall survival is the same, but the clinical worsening is different. And in the red curve, we have the patients with hematological malignancy, and these patients are more expected to presenting with severe disease, and this was a problem during the management of the patients in our clinic. We see that some patients, and it was just an information that the patients with hypogammaglobulinemia were the patients with the more clinical degradation, and patients with less than 6 grams per liter of gamma globulin is patients with a low immunity, and these patients had a poor outcome. It was significantly demonstrated that the patients with hypogammaglobulinemia was worsening at risk of outcome of the patients. And we see that these patients were also associated with viremia. So the severity of the disease was most associated with the positive viremia in the blood of the patients. So we have some demonstrations that the patients with hematological malignancy have a decrease of immunoglobulin in the blood, decrease of immunity, and increase of viremia in the blood, and poor outcome. So this, I think that this virological data confirms the positive viremia. It was 87% of the patients with severe disease. So it was very significantly different as compared with patients with no poor outcome. So just to conclude that the proteomic discovery of the patients pre-treatment and post-treatment with patients treated with anti-IL-6 receptor therapy could identify some new patterns of response to the treatment. And for example, we have activation of the complement system associated with poor outcome of the disease. And also Fc epsilon receptor signaling pathways was associated with higher mortality. So this is very new information that we can provide with the proteomic profile of the patients. We see at Gustave Roussy that some patients with hematological malignancy are more vulnerable and affected, emphasizing that the role of immunity is very important in COVID-19 control. And from a more general point of view, and I think this is a message of the presentation, that we need to have more information with a study with COVID-19. And probably we have the necessity to move to personalized approach to treat the patients, and to, for example, patients with immunocompetent, to propose some anti-inflammatory drugs, and for immunocompromised patients, such as patients with hematological disease, we probably need to propose some supportive treatment with immunity support, convalescent plasma. Thank you so much for your intentions. And we will be happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michaud. As a reminder to webinar participants, if you do have a question, please type it into the Q&A box in the control panel. And before we begin the Q&A, we'd like to ask attendees to take a moment after the webinar has ended to give us feedback by taking our exit survey. All right, let's start the Q&A. So Vito, what method of dimensionality reduction and clustering was used for the analysis that you were speaking about?
Yeah, so the statistical analysis was based on a student t-test. And then the clustering, so we calculate the distance in the heat map using the Manhattan method. and the clustering was using this word method. So I don't know if this is answer the question, but it's rather technical. And we didn't use any approach for dimensionality reduction in this specific case. Yeah.
Thank you. Jean-Marie, did the proteomics study provide any insights on the roles of cytokines in COVID-19?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. And of course, that IL-6 and also TNF-alpha is implicated with the poor outcome of the patients, but we do not see this in the results because I think that proteomic could see in-depth proteome analysis in the blood, but this do not concern the cytokine, and the size of the cytokine is very high and do not see in the result. I think that Vito could confirm this point.
Yeah, exactly. So this is obviously one of the limitations of our approach. So cytokines are not detectable because, of their low abundance usually, and also they are pretty small. So yeah, so that's unfortunately one of our limitations.
And Vito, what was
in my point, just to complete the response, I think that the proteomic approach is more precise and give more information than the cytokine profile. For example, we see in classical resistance with high elevation of TNF-alpha, but I think there is no clinical very interesting information with the cytokines level, and I think that the proteomic approach is very more associated with precision to understand the mechanism of action of the treatment.
Right. Thank you, Jean-Marie. Vito, what was the depth of the plasma or serum proteome coverage in the COVID-19 proteomic study? And were there any methods available for which you could use to increase the depth of analysis?
Yeah. So we could quantify around 500 proteins. So we have different workflows here. And depending a bit on the price, we can cover different. We get to different depth. So usually we can say between 500 and 600 proteins. We also have another workflow that includes plasma and serum depletion. So we basically remove the top abundant proteins in the plasma or serum, and this allows us to strongly increase the number of proteins that we can detect up to 1,500 currently. It's important to say, as I just mentioned during in the slides, that our workflow are constantly improving. So we are now 1,500, but we are, by the end of the year, we will be definitely around 2,000 and probably even higher next year. So.
And the proteomics study that was conducted on serum samples, can that proteomics workflow be applied to other sample types as well, for example, biofluids or tissue?
Yeah, exactly. So this is definitely applicable for all type of samples, so serum, plasma, obviously, but CSF, urine, tissue, FFP, tissue. So we have all semi-automated workflow that allow us to treat all type of samples with no exception. Yeah.
Great. So a question for both of you. What other examples of proteomics applications are there for oncology? Jean-Marie, would you like to take that one first?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think that in oncology there is a high medical need in the area to develop some personalized treatment. So I think the first is to understand how it works the treatment, how it works the efficacy of the treatment, how it works the resistance to the treatment, and how we can select the best patients for the best treatment. So this is the clinical most important thing, I think, in my clinical practice to improve the treatment of the patients. I think the major the major level could also to detect in some patients signal of adverse events. And I think in the future that we can detect with biomarkers some adverse events of the treatment before clinical symptoms. And I think that proteomic could be applied for this.
And Vito?
Yeah, I agree with Jean-Marie. I think we can definitely apply the technology we just described for instance, to study the mechanism of action, so we can identify the biological pathway that are affected by a treatment, as we did. We can identify a panel of biomarker to identify, for instance, biomarker to support clinical development. We then can also use different workflows, such as the phosphoproteomics workflow we also have to understand better cellular activation, for instance. Or another workflow we also have is based on this limit proteolysis coupled to mass spectrometry, so LIP-MS, and this really allows us to identify drug targets. So this can be also definitely of interest.
In your opinion, is the IFN gamma mutation that you mentioned affecting the expression of the IL-6 dependent gene, transcription of the protein, or the stabilization of the protein?
This is an excellent question, but I have not the response. I think that the paper of Hajjaj demonstrates some mutation in the TLR3 and mutation in the pathway of interferon. The patients had also some low level of interferon, but I have not in mind the result of the IL-6 in these patients. But I think there was no significant result in the IL-6 pathway. But this is also a good question that we can probably, this is a possibility that we can detect patients with high level of IL-6, and these patients with high level could be good candidate for the treatment. But I think up to date, this is not demonstrated.
All right. I believe we've run through all of the questions in the queue, so we are going to wrap it up there. We'd like to thank Jean-Marie Michaud, Vito Dozio, and our sponsor, Biognosys. Be sure to join us on June 16th for the second webinar in our Next Generation Proteomics for Precision Oncology series. That session will be a clinical and technological perspective of precision oncology in melanoma patients treated with immunotherapy. As a reminder, please look out for the pop-up survey after you log out to provide your feedback. And if you missed any part of this webinar or wish to listen to it again, a link to an archived version will be emailed to all attendees. Thank you for joining us for this Genome webinar.